here has felt alone the past 2 years? Cloistered, cut off. As a student, a friend, and a family member, I know I certainly have. And it almost seems silly to even ask, but would you say that not being able to speak or talk to other people during this time took a toll on you? Among everything I've learned from this period of turbulence is just how easily we used to take our freedom to communicate for granted. With most of our friends and family, we're able to see them face to face. And if not, then we possess telephones with which we're able to call and text them. So much is centered around facilitating our need to discuss and interact. But when we faced a challenge, things changed, even with all of the resources we have. It transpired that some forms of communication are just impossible to replace, though that doesn't stop us from trying. And without realizing it, we've become a lot closer to our ancestors, strangers long past, because of it. Like them, we had to struggle through the unexpected to invent whatever it was we needed, however we needed it. In essence, we adapted. We had to. So this challenge to our communication certainly hasn't been the first of its kind. Instead, it's a reminder of how language acts as a vehicle for our resilience, our adaptability as people. I mentioned the past, so let's go there. Imagine this. It's around the 9th century in southern China. So it's the beginning of the Song dynasty, and you're a woman. What do you think life was like for these women? Based on what you've read or heard, what kind of existence does this conjure up? Maybe you thought of the lack of access to education, which would be accurate as most women in these areas at those points in time were illiterate. Or perhaps you thought of their household duties, tasks concerning cooking, cleaning, taking care of the children. To add on to this, these women had extremely limited contact with the outside world. For example, if you were a bride and you married outside of your community, you could expect to never see your family again. And did anyone think of the practice of foot binding? It was during the Song dynasty that intentionally restricting the growth of girls' feet became popular among the elite and later spread to other social classes as well. The practice was debilitating. Women couldn't walk or stand without the assistance of others. They were harming themselves, their daughters, in order to emulate an unattainable ideal. Also, it didn't hurt that this kept young girls still and compliant, two qualities necessary for creating the cloth, clothing, and nets which were imperative for some families' incomes. Mainly and essentially, women were subordinate to men. All right, so what are your options? Who could you talk to? Who would understand? It transpired that that would be other women. But if you're so restricted in every aspect of your life, every facet, how on earth could you communicate with them? Well, how about a script? One that only women could comprehend. Let me introduce you to Niu Shu. The literal translation from Mandarin is woman's writing. And when spoken, both men and women in the area, Chongguan Tuhua, could comprehend. But when written, Niu Shu was unintelligible to men. In tandem with the discrete nature of the language, messages containing stories, poems, the sorrows of separation, and prayers would be found hidden in embroidery, cloth, calligraphy, and fans. Through their isolation and restriction, the need to write to loved ones, to the people they were close to, never ceased. Instead, the women overcame their lack of freedom and maintained intimacy by their own means, despite the obstacles faced. On this same note, there's even more we can learn from how languages are represented. We've looked at the ancient script of Niu Shu, but how about modern-day ideograms? Ideograms being characters or symbols which represent ideas without actually indicating the sounds used to say them. I'll show you a few ideograms, and to identify them, I'd like for you to fill in the blanks. So this first one would be tears of. Exactly, tears of joy, tears of laughter. No. Perfect. Please be. Exactly. And what about this one? What if I told you that this image appeared and began to circulate around social media on the 24th of February, 2022? And what if I told you that all those people you see, that they were going somewhere, that they were going to meet somewhere? Do you think it'd be a safe bet to say that they're meeting at 7 o'clock? And is anyone here a fan of Russian literature? No? All right, one person. Do you recognize that man in the center? Exactly, Alexander Pushkin, the Russian poet. And this just so happens to be Pushkin Square in Moscow. On the 24th of February, 2022, the day that Russia invaded Ukraine, that was how you organized a protest. Those who knew what to look for understood, and those who didn't missed it. You see, unauthorized protests have been banned in Russia since about 2014. A first-time violation of this policy can result in up to 15 days in detention. And for repeated offenders, they can receive up to 5 years in prison. And so, the usual methods of communicating to rally up protesters simply weren't cutting it anymore. Censors could easily search up key terms or words and then imprison the offenders. The need to adapt rose again, and with it, people and subsequently communication persevered. What we give meaning to isn't limited to just words. And that is why we will always adapt and evolve, and our meaning will be transmitted. As illustrated by 9th century China's patriarchal society, by a modern government censorship, through a pandemic, expression overcomes all obstacles. But language is a vehicle of communication. People are the initiators of this change. If the distances became too great, we invented Morse code and telephones. Those who couldn't speak or hear used their hands to say what they could not. Though we can all sincerely hope that no other crises come our way, there's really no way of knowing. What we do know is that as far as communication is concerned, our capacity for it is as essential and prevailing as the air we breathe. There is nothing that can destroy our need to be heard. It conquers all. As we face new challenges, I can't help but wonder, what new methods of communication will we develop? How will we adapt to what comes next?